Cooper gets to the Carrie Page house. It's number 1516. There's a number six pole and there's pulsing electricity, and we hear it. Then he gets up to the doorway of the house, doorway potentially another threshold. That number six pole, just like possibly the white horse, or just like possibly the Judy name, maybe these are real things in the dreamer's world that have made their way into various iterations of the Twin Peaks show. Who knows? I know
Right, because if
you
you
would
do
agree,
it one way,
but it's
why are you so fascinated with this poll? If you
yeah,
do it that one way, you cannot come to an answer. If you do it the opposite way, no, these real things exist in a person's life and they show back up in your dreams, just like you, just like the real person you, right? Because I don't know about that house, man. I don't know if that was her parents' place before her or whatever the case might be, or she's been
yeah.
familiar with that
And that
house.
the crunchy electricity is just it's such a cool sound. And sometimes I think when you hear the electricity, that's classically that's thought of as possibly entities are traveling along that, but it reminds me of some sort of mental synapse firing type thing, like something is happening.
Right, and particularly when you're creating new pathways, right? So there's something to be said about that. But hey, look, for both bad and good.
Yeah,
When the destructive behaviors train themselves, or when the dopamine receptors get, in either way that you look at it, that's true. I'm I'm prone to that. I'm prone to believing that David Lynch would have said, he would have called it consciousness or the field expansion. I think, right? I don't think he would be cool with our terminology. Um, he sort of developed that portion, and then Mark Frost gets involved later on for the return. But how do I think that Mark Frost would have justified that? Yeah, like a synaptic response. Yeah, very much so.
they I'm going to speed up a little bit. um he calls her a girl, not a woman. I think you're a girl named Laura Palmer.
You very much. What? Why do you? I've heard you say that before. Tell me why that sticks out to you so much.
It's interesting from Cooper's perspective, and it's interesting from Carrie Page's perspective because he's looking at this grown woman, calling her, "I think you're a girl, and I'm going to take you to your mommy's house." So it's just it's weird, People don't talk that way.
Because he almost cannot. It's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's just how he always thought. From the beginning, she was this girl that he was trying to solve her story. But he mentions the name of her parents, and when he gets to Sarah, obviously she kind of stutters, "Sister Sarah," and she's like, "What's going on?" And you could see some sort of shifting happening inside her. Cooper here is gentler than he was in the previous scene.
Yeah.
He's kind. Uh, he says, "I need to take you to your mother's house." He goes, "It's very important." He says, it's difficult to explain, like the whole backstory. She also has a similar line. She's like, "I got to get out of Dodge. It's a long story." So it's interesting that they each have this long story that they're not going to get into details over. The FBI just might save my ass, she says. Then we get the classic Lynchian phone ringing, to which she doesn't answer. And there's awesome, awesome acting from Shirley in the scene. Just
And
so,
now let's imagine that she does answer, right? Because what is this? This is like the last call to hightail it back to La La Land, whereby you're not going to confront any of this and you've got a way out. Should you choose to accept it, there you go. You've got a way out, right? And she doesn't. Let's talk a little bit about the aesthetics of what's happening. Um,
yeah, that phone call is great because there really are at least 10 different ways that one could plausibly interpret that. But what you said is very interesting. Go ahead, continue, please.
Well, I mean, even in the story, like if she takes
Yeah,
the call and somebody needs her to go someplace, or they recognize that she's home, or whatever the case might
yeah,
be, now one is stuck in the situation, right? So even if you don't look at it from a metaphorical perspective, that is very plausible to be true.
Yeah.
And or she doesn't want to be gotten a hold of and she's trying to get the hell away from people. So she don't want, right. But if she does take the phone call, certainly things change. Right. And so it's like the last ditch effort. But if we look around the stuff that is occurring, first and foremost, the way that Carrie Page is presented to us is a ta-da, very much so. That's the way it's presented to us, right? This is the thing. When I first started to look at it, I'm thinking to myself, Carrie Page has a backstory. Carrie Page knows who Carrie Page is. Carrie Page has a life that's lived. How do we know that? People are trying to get in touch with Carrie Page. There's a dead guy on the couch. That actor was told that he'd been there for 3 days. Why is that important? Because that would exceed the amount of time that at least we're shown that all of this took to occur. So if that's true, Carrie Page has been around a while. Not to mention, Carrie Page has a set of circumstances in her life that has brought her to a point where she needs to get the hell out of Dodge. See, I think what's happening with Carrie Page, Anthony, is that this is the truer iteration of the dreamer. And this is the effects of not confronting oneself early on. She probably didn't have access to ways to confront this stuff. And so she played out a cyclical trauma like was inflicted upon her. It's probably, I mean, it's not even really much of a guess that she associated pain and love, and that put her in some fairly bad situations. If you don't believe me, ask the guy on the couch, right? We also we also kind of see evidence of what? Domestic abuse, right? There's like holes in the walls and stuff. So we are like there's something about the window, right? Like the window's taken off, like maybe the guy tried to break back in. Like they've had fights, they've had skirmishes in the past, right? Whatever it was, she was apparently irritated. I'm going to assume that she's the one that killed this guy, being that she's still there and not freaked out and ran away and didn't call any cops about it, right? So I'm going to assume, being that she knows that that guy has been there and she doesn't want to be gotten a hold of, she's the one who did it, right? Now, another interesting transaction happens when she first opens the door. She's waiting on somebody. So this is almost like an intervention too, right? Again, if the scene goes another way, it's back into the muck. It's back into the muck we go. Then the place itself has information that we have seen in Twin Peaks. But again, it looks to me like Carrie Page has quite the fascination with horses. I don't know why we would interpret it as the other way around. I don't know why we would say, well, horses show up in Twin Peaks. To what end? What do they mean? Well, I don't really know. Well, they have been symbols in the past of this, that, and the other. Well, how did that track? Did it play out? Did it ever come to fruition? No? Okay. Well, isn't it plausible that she is the one who has an interest in horses? And so they end up in her personal unconscious, right?
They get in the car. It's a long ride. It's nighttime. She says, as she appears to be starting to fall asleep, but she's not falling asleep. She says, I tried to keep a clean house, tried to keep everything organized. It's a long way. Those days, I was too young to know any better. They stop at a Valero gas station for a pit stop, which is, I love the lighting in that scene. It's like darkness all around, and then just that section is lit up.
And so what is she telling you in that scene?
They
Why is
get
she
to Twin
talking?
Peaks.
Why is she talking in that scene? When you listen to that scene, you just recently watched it. You don't know much about her, and what she really says doesn't really fill out, you don't get to know much. She's having sparse thoughts, right? Like somebody who is exhausted.
Yeah,
That's true.
it's also evoking. I mean, it's evoking Laura Palmer in very big ways.
It,
Uh,
it is. It
and
is.
you're looking for that as a viewer. You're waiting for some
You
sort
are.
of awakening.
But being that at no point does she go, matter of fact, back when I was Laura Palmer, right? So I think what's most important about that, sometimes it's overlooked, is it's a very simple device. It just goes, I've lived an entire life.
Hmm.
Carrie Page has lived an entire life, right? I think that's what it's supposed to be telling you. It's a tough life. It's a bad life. It's a life that, of what I'm saying, it's a life full of trauma. It's a cycle. I'm clearly, but it's a that's what it's getting at, right? So just in case you think this person just showed up and they don't have any, like, no, we're going to reinforce this to you. No, this person lived a whole life, Carrie Page's life.
Yeah, or Laura Palmer's, or that's
No. This is Carrie Page telling you about Carrie Page's life that she believes actually happened. Now, I
yeah,
don't
I
think that.
understand, but everyone watching that for the first time is assuming this is some version of Laura Palmer. So when is assuming that this is a dissociated person, or not everyone, but this is Laura Palmer with a different name, with a different outcome.
But then we see in multiple ways that it's not. All the way from the people that had the house that she supposedly lived at, and on and so forth. So
But
what's the purpose of that? The purpose of that is that the dreamer is not Laura Palmer. The dreamer has created iterations of herself to deal with things that happen to herself. But the real dreamer has a real life. And that life shares certain very sad elements with the thing that she constructed so that she could put herself not necessarily on trial, but she could definitely litigate the situation. And that's all part of the psychological drama that reaches self, right? Because all indication says none of this is true until all time folds on itself.
we get to Twin Peaks. It is not a ghost town, as far as I can tell. It's just nighttime, but there are absolutely businesses that are still open. It doesn't look like the beginning of the leftovers, where all of a sudden people have just vanished. Um, we get to the 708 house, the classic Palmer household. They go up the stairs together. There's some great acting. We meet Mary Reber's character, who identifies herself as Alice Tremond. She says they bought the house from a Chalfant, a Mrs. Chalfant. We get the name of the episode as Cooper utters to her, "What is your name?" He identifies himself by the Cooper name as an FBI agent. Um, that conversation ends with really no satisfaction. They're back in the street. Cooper has this moment where he's looking toward the house, starts to take a step or so, leaning forward. Some people think there's that clicking sound again. I'm not sold on that necessarily. Maybe he leans forward and he does something with his arm, and he's utterly confused, it appears, and he says, "What year is this?" That line really seems to trigger a total change in the Carrie Page's character's demeanor. And then we get the voice of Sarah Palmer yelling at her name, the scream, the power surges and then goes out. And then we get a shot in the red room in slow motion of Cooper and Laura Palmer, her whispering into his ear. And that's it.
So, in terms of the prongs of the individuation process, we are now at the reddening, um, or what's called the rubedo. In the rubedo, the opposites are joined, not in thought, but in lived wholeness. Time will cease, a confusion will begin. The color of red will signify the beginning of the reddening, like the blood that's on the wall from the guy that's on the couch, as the two will be joined, the opposites are now joined to reach the final version of self. It is the return to the world, but now
I would
transfigured.
interrupt, but I would think if this was such a thing that was happening, we would get a little bit more of a with the show so filled with red. I would think we get a little bit more of a red cue. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, I think what Jung's talking about is there's only a cue of it, and then what happens is it's about the transconfiguration that's really important,
Mhm.
right? So what we've done is we spent the whole series basically in the blackening, right? It's the fight, the battle for the shadow, and then we get a very small portion that's in the whitening where it's like now all things will fall away and destruction of self will begin, and then as that occurs should if you have faced the shadow and you are vigorous in your attempt and you win and you move forward, Now you will finally join the entities. What entities? In this case, it is Laura and Carrie. Because for Carrie to recognize that the events that are they literally contradict the circumstance that she finds herself in. I think for the purposes of this, let's call this a dream. No, I don't think it's really a dream. I think it's a disassociation, but easy enough. We understand dream logic. I think that in and of this dream, what's essentially happening is these are more clear estimations of what Carrie Page's life really looks like. And then suddenly she's confronted with this autonomous thing that has been constructed that plays in her subconscious. That cannot be real. And if in fact that is real, then everything that's around her is pretend. The knowledge of that, that's the acceptance of the repression that you threw away, right? That's all of that would flood in, right? This is the place where my suppression exists. This is the place that holds me back. This is the identity that I've killed and needs to fall away. I've taken the journey, I've crossed the threshold. Now all this goes to die. And what literally happens, my man? What literally happens? Everything goes black. It's gone. Everything goes, it's gone now. To me, that feels sort of like awakening. When they say, we showed you the ending, right? Like it reached the ending. Again, it's one of those things where it's like, we can all come up with an answer like, what the hell do you mean about that? But it actually satisfies this entire theory of everything if, in fact, that's the moment where this person reaches self. If this Jungian, this self-described Jungian, sat down and wrote a story to track Jungian thoughts and show you the personal unconscious, then what's the point of that? It's always to reach self. He's got to show you how to reach self. That's what he's doing. He's got to show you how to reach self. What happens when you reach self? This thing falls away. And what happens to the archetypes? We'll get there next. But it's one of the more plausible explanations that tracks all the way through, right? They're telling you we're happy with the ending as the ending, right? They said that, like, yeah, maybe we have other thoughts for other things, but if this is the ending, that was the ending, right? How is that the ending? And one of the only ways that that's possible is, well, you have reached the conclusion of knowing what the purpose of all of these things going on was for. So you've reached a different purpose now, because otherwise it looks like it's a nightmare. It doesn't look like it's a ending. It looks like it's a brand new chaos. So in order for it to be an ending, it has to be the total destruction of that personal unconscious drama. It no longer serves a function.
And everything goes away, including the Mary Reber character, who archetypally would be serving what function, or maybe representing which element.
Well, that is one point where I think meta actually does come into it. But it does serve a purpose for like the narrative of Twin Peaks and even the narrative that we're attempting to track over the top of it. But it is a meta moment that happens on purpose. And here's the point of that. The point of that is the Palmers never lived there. Right? That's the point. Like in what you're seeing in this world where Odessa exists, perhaps Carrie Page has never actually seen that house, but she's seen it in her subpsyche. So now she can reconstruct it for the purpose of this demonstration, which is to face off against these things in her subpsyche and then reach the next plateau, the actual waking self, which is what Jung calls it, the waking self. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, a good way to go about doing that would be to sort of throw you like a meta bone where you go like, look, the person that really lives there is going to tell you that those people never lived there and is going to give you the chronological history. And then you listen, you go, I know those names. That's because you're still in that world that's permeated by both of these things now. She's got to confront that other thing. Isn't that the point of what he's doing? Cooper's bringing her there, whether he knows it or not. He just knows that I think he just knows that it's important. right? That's what I assume. I mean, he says that there's not time to tell her about the whole thing, but I think he means the events that led him there, rather than like actually having the knowledge of here's the exact plan. And
Yeah.
there's the fireman's exact point. I know
Mhm.
everything he wanted me to do. I don't think that he knows that. But I think that the point of bringing her there is so that she can confront that which is true about her life and that which is not true, this false identity that has to die away in order to become the self that you're supposed to be, or a better self, the transformation that Jung is on about. The whole point of individuation, the whole idea of reaching self. That's his whole deal, right?
We get blackness, and then we get somebody's view in slow motion of Cooper and Laura from a scene earlier in this episode, I believe, when she's whispering into his ear, and it's like just super slow motion with dark space low playing
So
over the
like we
top.
talked about before.
Who whose view is that? Because that wouldn't be Carrie Page the dreamer's view, would it?
Well, sure it would be, because here's what's strange. So if you went through the entire Jungian process, right? Let's say you devoted 6 months, you went to a clinical psychologist that could still say that they practice Jungianism aloud without being laughed out of like a real office, right? Because there's a lot of, look, I think that Jung has a lot of good ideas. I think he gets boggled down in trying to track why mysticism, why story, why narrative, why do we do this, right? And I think that people misinterpret that. And so I think because he's not here to go, look, knucklehead, it's not about the mystic portion of it, right? It's about the fact that life is unknowable to a lot of us, and life is strange and weird. Why did we do the shit that we do? And like clearly, I'm doing it from a scientific perspective, but it's interpretive enough that clinical psychologists don't want to, they don't want to mess with it. But if you went through the entire process, the idea would be so that at the other end you would go, and I have reached the moment of self. And the very next second, that new piece of information that was told to you, the new thing you saw on the newsstand, whatever the case might be, it's something you add to the grand collection of self. Because so how could you ever be done with individuation? As long as you're alive, how could you ever actually be done? So your archetypes live to tell the tale again, right? Not the archetype, the one that you just used for the personal unconscious drama that you went through this entire process to reach this new understanding of yourself, but the archetypes in their formless form or their representative form. So that goes back to what we were talking about before, where I said this moment seems to occur, and then when they're necessary, they seem to deploy. Perhaps that they're done and they go back into that moment forever. Perhaps will not be the face of Agent Cooper the next time that a need for self defense kicks in. Maybe Carrie Page is at a point in her life, though, Anthony, in her external life, where she has enough of her shadow, she has enough of her self defense mechanism, she has enough of these things, right? Where she won't need that archetype to be the thing that gives her the next message next time, whether she sees it or doesn't, the thing that plays out in the back of her mind. Perhaps it's not self-defense that she needs. Perhaps that stays locked away until she needs it again. Apparently, what she really needed, right, was to face off against the shadow, because the shadow took over her life. So again, what does that look like for us? What that looks like for us in the external world is that we're doing that shit you shouldn't do. You're letting your bad habits run amok. And if you let them run amok deep enough, they can really, really hurt you. You need some of it. You need to be confrontational when it's important. You need to defend yourself when it's important. But you cannot live your life under the auspices of I'm always right, you're always wrong, whatever. Or I can't learn. There's nothing to be obtained, right? So you can't be self-defense always. You can't be shadow always. But you can't be none of those things either. It's weird about that moment. That not just in the series, but in Twin Peaks in general.